This is Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast.
What's the scale of the structure itself? Like, how big is this thing? What are we looking at in terms of miles?
Well, let's see. It's generally given as 38 kilometers. So we'll go 38 times 0.62, which makes it about 23 to 24 miles in diameter.
Okay.
So it's pretty good sized.
Pretty big, yeah.
Which is way bigger than the city plan for Atlantis that people are trying to compare it to.
Brad, we'll get to that, Brad.
Well,
Brad.
We'll get to that, okay.
I'm thinking the commenters that I keep seeing that are just bubbling over, try to burst out. You know, when's he going to say it?
Yeah. Well, what's good is I hear what they're saying seems to be like, I want to hear him talk about the Richat structure. It's not, some of them are like, it's Atlantis, but a lot of them are just like, let's hear what he thinks about the Richat. So
This is
that's
true.
what we do. Yeah.
Right,
They're not demanding you say it's Atlantis. Not yet. Maybe after this episode, they will demand that you tell them that this is Atlantis. But so far, they just want to hear what you say.
Well, basically what I'm doing is I'm demonstrating that it's a natural feature. So that's the first thing here. It's a natural feature. I'm going to pull up Google Earth so we can get the big picture of this.
No.
Can we see this?
We see it.
We're now seeing it.
We are seeing
Africa. North Africa.
Okay, so let's zoom in. And basically, if this is now Google Earth, so you can look down here in the lower right-hand corner, elevation above sea level. So when I hover right over the Richat structure, it's right at between 13 and 1,500 feet above sea level. Right?
Okay.
You'll also see that if I go up here, this is 1,000 feet. If I go down here, at 1,200 feet. If I go up here, we're at 1,000 feet. So basically what you're seeing your Google Earth and hover over it is that this area right around the Richat structure is higher than the rest of the area by 200 to 500 feet. And that's partially due to the doming. So you've got this doming that comes up, and then perhaps in the doming process itself, it's split. You see, this is like thing is laying in this thing here that was sort of upthrust. And we can zoom in on this and move you guys out of the way and spin around and go down like this. So check this out now. See, now we're here, we're 1,040 feet, and here we're at 1,200. So it essentially, picture this, it domes up and the rock is breaking as it domes up, and then there are sharp edges that are exposed. And that's what these cliffs are, these 600 to 800 foot cliffs. And if we zoom in, you can see incised by erosion. This is obviously water erosion here that we're seeing all along here. And what really looks very much like recessional cataracts, which we've looked at quite a bit, and we'll look at more, particularly when we're talking about the channel scablands and recessional cataracts.
Slow down a bit. Let us catch up on the Google Earth pictures here.
So I'm going to zoom back out. There we go. So at the desert floor, I'm going to zoom in. Look at the texture of the desert floor. Very interesting. Now, this is very similar water deposited sand, which of course is being wind blown now. But wind clearly is not going to be moving gravel size chunks. It's going to be moving sand and dust size. But when we get to places like, look right here, you see the current ripples? Now there's sand between them, but if these are similar to the giant current ripples we see out in Washington and Montana, they're basically constructed of gravel and boulders, and then the sand is blowing over them. We've seen a good along in the Cadiz Basin in the Mojave Desert, where you've got a gravel boulder lag that's essential feature. The modern sand is duning over it. You know, the dunes are forming, but you can still see the underlying structure because the sand will particularly accumulate in the troughs between the crests of the ripples. See, but underlying that is you find the boulder composition of these things, which tells you it's a fossil feature based upon some ancient hydraulic event. If we zoom, I'm going to zoom out here. I'll go back, swing it around to the north. And notice the texture here. These sweeping forms coming down this way, passing over the region out to sea right here. And if we zoom in some of these areas, let's see. Okay, like look right here. Just the giant ripples. Can you see those?
Hold on, we're still catching up. Okay, there they are. I see them now.
Okay, so I'm just pausing right here.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is southwest of the actual structure. So what it appears to me is sometime you had tremendous processes at work here. Oh yeah, look at this, a beautiful, oh man, look at this architecture. That'll catch up and you'll see it.
What are we looking at? What we're looking for? Ah.
Is it shown? There it is.
Wow.
There it is. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Intense.
That is amazing.
Yeah. And off, I'll zoom back out. Once you get off the coast, right where these extreme fluvial forms end up, the French term debouching into the ocean, we have here, I've got it, there was a paper recently published. A paper was about the discovery of huge submarine canyons off the coast. Here we go. Okay. Tell me when you can see this black and white map. Do you see a black and white map? Yeah.
We're still looking at Google Earth.
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really eating into some of your resources there, Randall. If you got a lot of things open, that Google Earth is slowing things down.
I see. Okay, so okay, well, I better close Google Earth.
Stop screen share. Yeah, it's back to us. I never saw the black and white.
Okay, no more Google Earth. Okay, well, now you'll get to see it.
Okay, we see that. Yep.
All right. So this is from a recent paper. Goes back. This is well, not that recent, 2006, but that's fairly recent. And what we're seeing here: morphology, seismic characteristics, and development of Tamiris Canyon, offshore Mauritania, a newly discovered canyon preserved off a major arid climatic region. So they've discovered that there's this huge canyon system right off the coast where if you followed these fluvial forms where they would enter the ocean, there are submarine canyons. And you can see this is marking it right here, which the Richat structure just right up here. Let's go down to so yeah, if we actually look at them, they are like submerged river systems that connect with, in other words, you follow those fluvial forms down, and where they would enter into the ocean onto the coastal plain, they form these river valleys, which is, again, strong evidence that, yes, there were tremendous floods that drowned this landscape at some point. Yeah, this is so this is like 3,000 meters down.
Wow.
Right. And this shows cross sections of the canyon. So I think there's a genetic connection then between the fluvial forms on land and the fact that there are these submarine canyons off the coastline. So to me then what that suggests is that you had this fluvial event or events that stripped away the overlying layers of rock to expose this core of this thing, which is, again, if you picture that it domes up, the dome essentially, picture a large pimple, right? And then if you shear the top of it off, what's going to happen is you're going to see a ringed structure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because there's layers of, like, different layers that are being pushed up. So when you cut them off, you get rings to show each layer.
Yeah.
Exactly. So now, is this Atlantis? Well, I would think that we're looking at a natural feature here, so it wasn't something that was constructed by humans. Let's go back to the hypothesis that we've been kind of developing here in these podcasts over the last 4 or 5 podcasts we're talking about. We're hypothesizing that there may have been a fairly sophisticated, I'll say a sophisticated maritime culture, that there were islands in the mid-Atlantic that would have been ideal habitats for a culture to evolve during the ice ages. We tried to establish that there's nothing pseudoscientific about the idea. We tried to show that there was theoretical evidence and empirical evidence that there was considerable subsidence along the mid-Atlantic ridge, that when you account for the rise of sea level and the isostatic subsidence of the sea floor, it's not at all implausible that you had a large island complex in the mid-Atlantic Ocean. Now, assuming that you had a maritime culture evolving there, something along the lines of maybe a grander Minoan or Phoenician civilization, it is certainly plausible that they could have had outlying colonies. There's nothing here woo about this, that the model that we're developing here. We're not talking about, like Mike likes to say, crystal spaceships or whatever. We're not talking about any of that. We're talking about what Plato describes, basically lots of ships, lots of trade going on, and colonies. I mean, he basically describes that kind of a cultural scenario, right? So if we're accepting that as a working hypothesis, it would follow that it wouldn't be inconceivable at all that these people could have visited this structure.
That's true.
And we know that there were people there. I mean, we see Neolithic artifacts there that are 5,000 years old, and we see Acheulean artifacts there that are 250 to 300,000 years old and older. So this place has been visited and occupied by humans. Now, so from that standpoint, could we surmise that perhaps it served as a model for a ringed structure that was constructed? That's not out of the question.
Yeah.
That's certainly feasible. I wouldn't say that. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that this is a natural feature. It is not a constructed feature. Plato is describing part of the thing is that he describes the island of Atlantis, 3,000 by 2,000 stadia. But then he describes the circular city structure, which you have to differentiate from the island itself, the large island, which would be 2,000 by 3,000 stadia. Now, given that a stade is generally, I think, 608 feet, give or take a few inches. And if you want to look that up, Kyle, stade or stadia. But so 3,000 stadia would be, that would be about 345 miles, so that's 3,000 by 2,000. So if you then times that, so 345 times that by 0.666, you get about 228 miles. So interestingly, the dimensions 2,000 by 3,000 stade that he gives is roughly equivalent to the size of the Azores Plateau. Is in that same scale, within that range. Okay, so again, he's not too far off in terms of his geography. Now, the city structure is something else again, and I think we should just go back to Plato himself for this, and see what he actually says about the city structure. And I will find that quote, and we will review it.
Okay, so I found stadion.
Okay, let's see what it says.
The unit. The stadion, formerly also anglicized as stade, was an ancient Greek unit of length based on the circumference of a typical sports stadium at the time.
There we go. Okay.
According to Herodotus, one stadion was equal to 600 Greek feet. Podes.
Okay.
However, the length of the foot varied in different parts of the Greek world, and the length of the stadion has been the subject of argument and hypothesis for hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
Various hypothetical equivalent lengths have been proposed.
But generally around 600 feet.
600 feet-ish, yeah.
And based upon the length of the Greek foot, it actually has been refined by several metrologists right at 608 feet. But for purposes of our looking at scaling factors here, 600 feet, 608 feet, 610 feet is fine.
I think
So
612 would be. That's what it should be.
612.
Because
Okay.
it equals 9. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So this is what Jawa translation of Plato says. First of all, they bridged over the zones of sea which surrounded the ancient metropolis, making a road to and from the royal palace. At the very beginning, they built the palace in the habitation of the god and of their ancestors, which they continued to ornament in successive generations, every king surpassing the one who went before him to the utmost of his power, until they made the building a marvel to behold for size and for beauty. And beginning from the sea, they bored a canal of 300 feet in width and 100 feet in depth and 50 stadia in length, which they carried through to the outermost zone, making a passage from the sea up to this, which became a harbor, and leaving an opening sufficient to enable the largest vessels to find ingress. Moreover, they divided at the bridges the zones of land which parted the zones of sea, leaving room for a single trireme to pass out of one zone into another. And they covered over the channels so as to leave a way underneath for the ships, for the banks were raised considerably above the water. Now the largest of the zones into which a passage was cut from the sea was 3 stadia in breadth, and the zone of land which came next of equal breadth. But the next 2 zones, the one of water, the other of land, were 2 stadia, and the one which surrounded the central island was a stadium only in width. The island in which the palace was situated had a diameter of 5 stadia. All this, including the zones and the bridge, which was the 6th part of a stadium in width, they surrounded by a stone wall on every side, placing towers and gates on the bridges where the sea passed in. The stone which was used in the work they quarried from underneath the center island. Okay, so there again, the reference that we're talking about several islands here, a group of islands.
Mm-hmm.
And from underneath the zones on the outer as well as the inner side. One kind was white, another black, and a third red. And as they quarried, that they at the same time hollowed out double docks, having roofs formed out of the native rock. Some of the buildings were simple, but others they put together different stones varying the color to please the eye and to be a natural source of delight. So now, what is all that describing? Well, let me do this. I will show the, we will do another screen share here. There it is. Okay, so we've got, as you see here, the outer ring of water is 3 stadia in width. Then you have a ring of land, which is 3 stayed. Then you have another ring of water, which is 2 stayed or stadia. Ring of land, which is also 2. Then a ring of water, which is 1. And then the central island here that has the Temple of Poseidon on it is 5 stayed in width. The Temple of Poseidon itself is 1 stadium in length and 1/2 in width. So it's a double square, which, again, that's the same dimensions, the same proportions of the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. That double square. And the double square we know as geometricians is how you derive the golden section.
Right.
So I'm going to jump down here. Let's see, where do I have this? We'll go down to where I am.
He calls it the Temple of Poseidon, but that's the Greek name for that particular.
Yes,
deity.
yeah. And in the narrative, he discusses his use of Greek terms.
Okay.
And basically justifies it, because basically he's saying that the Greek gods were the Atlantean gods. And
What would the So I was just thinking, when the Egyptian priests told this story to Solon, what word did they use? What name did they use for that god?
right.
That would be what I was interested in there.
Well, where did my, sorry about that.
No problem.
Okay. Here we go. Okay, this is what I was looking for. Got it. We're still screen sharing, right?
Yeah.
We are.
Okay, so here we go. Here's the numbers. So we can get the dimensions here. If you figure across here, I'm using, as it says down here, I'm using the Greek state of 608 feet, which was almost certainly one of the variants of the state that was in use.
Okay.
So we can count here. We got 3, 6, 10, 11, then 22, plus the 5 is 27. So if we go 27 stades times 608, we get that it's 16,416 feet in diameter. We divide that by 5,280. So it's just 3.1 miles in diameter. And if we use 600 feet, it would be somewhat smaller. Here's sort of a three-dimensional, very simplified, but it kind of shows the layout. You had the ocean, you had a great canal cut from the ocean that led into the ringed structure. Then from there it was bridged over so that this was how you could gain access to the various rings of land and ultimately get to the center ring that contained the temple. So this can kind of give you the layout. Now, if this is literal, I mean, I'm not going to say it is or I'm not going to say it isn't. Within our hypothesis, is it possible that they could have undertaken an infrastructure project on this scale? I'm not going to rule it out.
Right. Why not? Why?
It would have been, I mean, obviously this was an enormous undertaking, but clearly we have overwhelming evidence that ancient peoples were capable of undertaking enormous infrastructure projects. Yeah. So there's no a priori reason to say, no, this is utterly impossible. Of course, we just don't know. We don't know at this point. We would have to find some remnant of this thing in order to determine whether or not it was actually real or metaphorical.
Or if they.
So what I'm going to do now, yeah, go ahead.
Or if they were utilizing some natural features on the Azores Plateau to basically make that kind of.
Sure.
Stuff. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, let's see, do I have it with this one? Where is it? So I have, here we go. So let's go to here. And here is the 3.1 mile city of a ringed center of Atlantis superimposed on the Richat structure.
Okay, yeah. The Richat's pretty big.
Yeah, much bigger.
Right.
But again, I want to get back to the idea that, yeah, let's hypothesize that there was an Atlantean culture. They were maritime. This certainly would have been within their purview. They could have easily sailed here, traveled overland, and looked at this thing, studied this thing, and been inspired by it. Plato doesn't say anything about it. But, again, Plato is so clear on it being west. In his description that you sail west from the Pillars of Heracles, which I've looked and looked. There's essentially the consensus view in all of the ancient literature and references is that it was the Straits of Gibraltar that was being referred to, and there was the inner ocean and the big outer ocean. What he describes explicitly in the narrative is sail west, you come to a group of islands. Beyond that, you come to Atlantis, and beyond Atlantis was the big continent beyond. So his geography perfectly fits a description of the Atlantic Ocean. And of course, when you go in,
let's be clear too that in Plato's time and even in Solon's time, where he was talking to the Egyptians, they knew what east, west, north, south was. Not
yes.
I'm just pointing that out because there are some comments asking, like, did they have some different cardinal directions? No, they were the same.
No, they were the same. There's no evidence at all that they had different cardinal directions.
Right. Okay.
Right. the sun rose at 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. The sun rose in the east and set in the west. Now
Right.
the geomagnetic pole, yeah, has migrated somewhat. Yes. Has the geographic pole migrated? Well, that's another question. But if it did migrate, it would be a plate tectonic function, which isn't going to really have much reference to where the sun rises and sets with respect to the geoid. So
Okay.
when we look at this, we're basically looking at south, not west of the rock of the Pillars of Heracles. The size doesn't fit. The studies going back, now to 1969, 50 years ago, all conclude that it's a totally natural feature. But nonetheless, a very interesting feature.
Fascinating.
Very fascinating, yeah. And sure, I would be open to the idea that it could have served as a model, because there are other structures, and I guess I wasn't going to get into this, but hell, why not?
Yeah, we're coming up. We're up on time here, so let's look at a couple more things, and we can close it out for the night if you want. We're always good to keep going for hours. So.
Oh yeah, we'd probably close it out. This will tie it into another dimension of our studies that we can do. The material that we cover in this. So I'm going to do another screen share, and we're going to look at the so-called Portsmouth works in along the Ohio River. Now this is an ancient earthwork, which according to some, which would be of interest to you fellas, that was an ancient gigantic serpent effigy. And it stretched across, it actually, one end was here at this square with elongated mounds here, and then it stretched over the Ohio River. This is from the Esquire and Davis survey, because most of it doesn't exist anymore. And it came over this way, and there was a sort of this collection of interesting forms and shapes here, circular mounds and things, came back down, crossed the river, and then ended in this big multi-ringed structure right here. Of which the only thing that remains is the central mound, which is in the middle of the town of Portsmouth now, and it's in a park. You can go there, and we actually went and visited it and found this mound, and that's really almost the only part of, I think there's some of this left over here. So this is a close-up of the multi-ringed structure, which of course we now know that lots of ancient peoples were very obsessed with multi-ringed structures. And circular structures and so on. Interestingly, you'll notice, that there are breaks within the rings. So let's go to the next one here.
Like the widths are like 2, 2, and 1.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like 2, 2, 1, 1.
Yeah. So here is a colorized version. Now this square here is just about almost exactly the same size as the square base of the Great Pyramid for scale.
Oh, man. Wow.
Yeah. So this was quite a magnificent undertaking.
Yeah.
And it required, the total mounds here was, because it's 5 miles from one end to the other end. So, if you take this and like this causeway with these double mounds, there's 10 miles of double mounds here just in the causeway itself. So this is a gigantic undertaking.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we come back to the ring structure of Atlantis, and at scale, here is the Portsmouth circle placed in there, which fits very nicely. It does, and the Temple of Poseidon exactly fits right inside this ring here. See that? So there's the city plan of Atlantis with the Portsmouth ring structure superimposed at the same scale. And interestingly, the scaling ratio between this ring structure and the city plan of Atlantis is very, very close to the scaling ratio between the city plan of Atlantis and the Richat structure.
Wow. Okay, so back to the question you asked at the beginning of this podcast. Is that a coincidence that I cannot worry about, Randall, or does that have some actual meaning? Do I need to like stay awake tonight thinking about that?
No, I would say you don't need to worry about it. It's just
Okay.
a coincidence.
Okay.
Okay, then if I take that Portsmouth multi-ring circle, magnify it by 10.8, and lay it on the city
Ooh.
plan of Atlantis, we find it's not perfect, but it's certainly suggestive.
Now you can stay awake because of that.
All right. I was looking for something to keep me up. Wow.
10.8 times.
Yeah.
10.8, yeah.
108. Of course.
Well, we'll do one more thing to help keep you awake tonight. If I go down here, let's see. Okay, so here's the Richat structure. And then up here at 22 degrees, 55 minutes west, north 22 degrees, 55 minutes, west 10 degrees, 24 minutes. I've got a marker. Then I've got another one up here. I don't have the coordinates, but the Temimichat crater, which is here. I'm going to do, are we still screen sharing? Yeah.
Yeah.
So here we have the Temimichat, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, crater in Mauritania. Right? Okay, 24 degrees, 15 minutes north, 9 degrees, 39 minutes west. And then we also have the Tenamur crater at 22 degrees, 55 minutes north, 10 degrees, 24 minutes west, right? Then here we have the Temimichat crater, this, and the Richat, and they are in a dead perfect alignment.
Oh man, like it was what are those called? A bombardment, where something breaks up and it hits in a line.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Is that the explanation? I don't know.
I don't know.
It's another interesting coincidence.
All right.
And I don't know, but yeah, that's the first thing it would suggest is, and then there's actually, but I'm not sure yet of the dating of these other craters.
Right.
So that would be the next thing to research. But the work of Herbert Shaw that he did, Chronicles, Craters, and Cosmos. He basically used chaotic dynamics to develop this idea that that impact events on Earth were not randomly displayed, but were actually cohered to certain patterns. And there were certain regions and alignments, and it's a very complex, deep book. I attempted to read it once. I have more mathematical tools at my disposal now, so I'm actually wanting to reread the book because I attempted to read it when it first came out in the 80s. But yeah, he basically refers to impact swaths, that even over time, there will be certain places on Earth that are more susceptible to impacts, which I find to be a very interesting idea.
Yes.
We kind of joked about that a little bit.
About how stuff's always blowing up over Siberia.
Yeah. So, okay. So now to summarize all this, I think what I've tried to show here is that the Richat structure is a very interesting thing, worthy of study in its own right, but I would not conclude that was Atlantis. For one thing, being 1,500 feet above sea level, when Plato clearly describes Atlantis subsiding and being submerged beneath the Atlantic Ocean. I don't know how you would square something, and there's no evidence that I'm aware of that this was under the ocean until you go back, way back, when the deposition of those limestones occurred, which obviously was not within any time frame that would be consistent with Atlantis. However, it does appear that there were extreme floods and fluvial erosion over the plateau that would have been ultimately responsible for exposing the core of this unique structure that would have been buried beneath many hundreds of feet, maybe thousands of feet of bedrock at one time. So I'm going with the natural explanation that it's a domal uplift, shear off the top that exposes the rings, that it's a based on a magma plume, possibly the idea that there could be an impact event somewhere in its genesis, although the opinions that have pretty much emerged in the recent studies of this, which include geophysical surveys and on-site sampling and things like that, using Raman spectroscopy and various sophisticated technologies to identify the minerals and the composition of the basalts and so on, that it clearly is a natural feature, a magnificent natural feature that was occupied by various groups of people. And if there was a civilization during the Ice Age that could have visited it and could have been a source of inspiration. But I've thought for a long time that many of the circular structures that were impacts might have served as inspiration. And the number of large circles that we find in this obsession with circles in so many ancient cultures. Look at Avebury and then look at Newark, right? And what we just looked at, the Portsmouth with these multiple ringed structures. So somewhere that idea implanted itself in the human brain. And
it was Atlantis.
That's right.
Perhaps. So hopefully we've covered enough now that I think we can, I don't know how somebody is going to now come back and make the argument that this was in fact the literal Atlantis, right, because it's just too many details inconsistent with Plato's account. And Plato's,
I think you answered the question. The question that a lot of viewers had was they want to hear what you think about it, and that's what you have just done. So
yeah,
I don't think there's going to be a lot of fighting about this. I mean, there might be one or two guys, but
there's going to be an all-out brawl.
Well, okay, so then somebody basically has to make a counterfactual argument.
No, it wouldn't matter which side you take. It's going to be a brawl.
That's right. We'll let it happen. Just let the fight happen in the comments now, right? We just can watch. It'll be great.
But yeah, I mean, like you said, they got to bring the evidence.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got two sides. You've got Plato's detailed account, which is very specific, right? That's one thing, right? Which, right at the outset of this, we're trying to say, well, let's be consistent with Plato's account. Let's not start changing the details around, but let's just see what happens if we take what he says at face value. His geography, his geology, his astronomy, his chronology. If we just look at those things, take it at face value, let's see if, what we come up with. And what we come up with is a model that's pretty damn consistent with his scenario. And I tried to show, and we certainly didn't cover all of the science. There was all kinds of the science, the marine geology and the oceanography and stuff we didn't get into. We got into enough to show that this idea that subsidence of the ocean bottom is not woo, it's not inconsistent. It could have been very substantial, could have been several thousand feet, right? We've shown that there was major catastrophic events that occurred in the Atlantic Ocean whose timing was consistent with Plato's chronology. Right? So you've got Plato's highly detailed account, which the question I ask over and over again is how much can you deviate from that and still be talking about Atlantis, right? Now we turn to the Richat structure, and basically what we're seeing is that we've got half a century or more of studies going back, all of which the controversies are surrounding the idea of how it was formed, but nobody disputes the fact that it was other than a natural phenomenon.
Natural phenomenon, yeah.
Yeah, and you can't, I mean, when you're talking about gabbroic dikes that feed down into a demonstrable magma chamber, I mean, clearly that is a natural feature.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a geologic feature. It is not human made.
Right.
But if somebody's got a beef or they want to come up with a legitimate argument and state their case, then recommend it that they send it to the email, not in the comments on YouTube or on Facebook or Twitter, but, organize it, get it together, send it in an email, and we'll run through it. Kosmographia1618@gmail.com, right? So
There you go.
you want to pull your arguments together, send it through email.
Yeah. Perfect.
Next episode, Antarctic-Atlantis.
I was going to say, let's do the moon and prove that the Atlanteans came from the moon.
Well, when you said Antarctica, now, I know that there's been a couple of books or a book written purportedly claiming or making the case that Atlantis was in Antarctica. I have no doubt that Antarctica has yielded up all kinds of interesting secrets and mysteries and information that we're going to learn. And nor would I rule out the possibility that there were times when there was major deglaciation episodes of Antarctica and it could have been colonized by people. I'm not going to rule that out.
Right.
However, again, I have a very difficult time stretching Plato's detailed accounts to make Atlantis, put it in Antarctica. Right. Especially when you can see what we've covered over these last, 4 or 5 episodes here.
Yeah.
You've got to confront, you got to address that information. You've got to address the information that there is empirical evidence of major subsidence along the mid-Atlantic ridge. You've got to address the evidence that the Azores Plateau could have been a substantial island during the Ice Age. So, I mean, if you're not addressing that, then, I don't know, don't waste my time anymore. But
yeah, basically, like all of that shows that there's no need to try to find Atlantis somewhere else.
Exactly.
Right. Maybe that doesn't mean we don't want to go look at these other places.
Of course not. I mean, all of these places are extremely interesting.
Right.
And valuable.
Whatever. If there is an advanced, very ancient lost civilization in Antarctica, it just isn't Atlantis. It's just an ancient lost civilization that's in Antarctica.
Yeah.
They all stray from Plato in one or many ways.
Right. That's right.
Now,
It's not acceptable.
Plato does describe, outlier colonies. I mean, he talks about Atlanteans coming all the way in, to the inner Mediterranean. Again, all this is hypothetical, but in staying conservative in terms of our hypothesizing, if you had a maritime culture in the mid-Atlantic, there's no reason why it also couldn't have colonized the United States, South America, the British Isles. I mean, if they were in the kind of culture that they would create. I mean, like what Plato's describing, triremes is going to be wooden sailing ships, right? Well, I mean, what's going to exist of that ever after 11, 12, 13,000 years? And then given the nature of the terminal ice age catastrophes that swept over huge regions of the Earth's surface, I mean, we wouldn't expect to find much of such a culture. I mean, if the Phoenician culture had existed 14,000 years ago, what would we expect to find of it now? Probably not much. Right. And as far as the ringed city structure that we were just looking at, now that would be the thing. If we found that submerged, I mean, that would be pretty convincing evidence. But I don't know. I mean, whether that was real or whether
that flat top, submerged islands that they found the beach sand on.
Yeah, somewhere like that.
Dive down there.
Yeah.
And that's where we would be looking. And I think that, there remains to be seen some pretty interesting discoveries along the Azores Plateau and the mid-Atlantic ridge and sunken islands generally in the Atlantic Ocean. And in fact, I mean, sometimes the clue is right in your face. I mean, the Atlantic Ocean, where does it get its name?
Right.
It's named after Atlantis. Whoever, way back whenever, named the Atlantic Ocean, they had Atlantis in mind.
Right.
I saw somebody commenting saying, well, no, nobody believed that, Atlantis was, everybody believed that Plato just meant it as a metaphor, which of course is not true at all. I mean, if you go back and you look at the commentary, you realize that it was pretty much split down the middle. The pre-Socratics all believed in a literal Atlantis. The Aristotelians thought that Plato meant it as a metaphor, but the pre-Socratics and a lot of and then into the Pythagoreans, they all believed it was literal, that it actually existed, and so did the Arabs. There's enough references, vague references, to suggest that there was evidence that the Arabs inherited a lot of that tradition of Atlantis.
Oh, cool.
Now, there's a lot more that we could be talking about, but if people want to get that, they're going to have to buy the book. So
That's right.
Perfect.
Yep, print that slideshow, put it on Amazon.
That's right.
Well, we probably didn't even look at half of the total number of slides.
Yeah.
So, but it was enough, I think, to lay out the rudiments of the case that I'm trying to make here.
I think so.
Yeah.
Well done.
Well done. All right. Like Brad said, can get a hold of us, all of us here, including Randall, at Kosmographia1618@gmail.com. Check out the website, Kosmographia.com, and the YouTube channel. You're posting it on GeoCosmicRex and also the Kosmographia channel.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else?
I would just, again, like to extend my thanks to anybody who is helping to support this work. And
yes.
we're going to try to come up with some creative ways to reward those who are helping us out here and helping us to grow this, because there's a lot we could be doing here. And in future podcasts, we'll be talking about some of the specific ideas we've got in mind of where we would like to take this work, because we'd like to take it out of just the academic level, if using the loose definition of that term, as we're doing here, but actually spend more time in the field, and then possibly the other important thing is the restoration of a 21st century version of the Pythagorean Academy, where this kind of information can be assembled and disseminated, because there is nothing like that now.
Right.
So that would be something else that we'll be talking about in future podcasts.
That's right. Out of the armchair and into the field. That's what we're looking for here.
That's what we're looking for, yeah.
Do you want to hint at where we're going in the next podcast?
Oh yeah, what direction
Or
we're
to
going?
be determined?
Well, I think to be determined, but again, I think that if we end up getting George Howard on here in the near future, we need to really educate people about the Younger Dryas events, because that's so important. And it would be a natural segue from what we've been talking about, because the whole Atlantean context places it right in the Younger Dryas, right? The termination of the Younger Dryas at 11,600, that's Plato's date for the final destruction of Atlantis, and the date for Meltwater Pulse 1b. So I'm probably inclined to want to go forward with establishing what we now know about these great transitional events in Earth history that occurred at the end of the last ice age. But yeah, there's a lot of, we referenced earlier talking about the monumental earthwork architecture. Looking at that in more detail would be very fascinating. Graham Hancock covered a lot of that in his book, America Before.
Yes.
An excellent read, by the way. But there was a lot of stuff he didn't talk about in there. And I visited I think Bradley and I have probably visited more sites in North America than he actually Yeah, we have. We've visited way more sites than he actually even discusses in that book. So we've got some contributions to make to that whole study. We should also talk about some mass extinction events in Earth history, including the most recent mass extinction at the end of the last ice age, and get people familiar with that Pleistocene world that disappeared, because a lot of people have a very vague comprehension of the state of the world during the late Pleistocene, and that in itself is very interesting, because that late Pleistocene world is the world that that is what our modern world was born out of.
Right.
And rose out of the ashes of that Pleistocene world. So, and we can also look at comments, if people have anything that they're particularly interested in, although it'd be good if you kind of tried to follow the trend of where we're trying to go with this thing. But and also it'd be great to educate people more about the whole phenomena of impact geology and get into some of the astronomy that would be necessary to help understand what you guys were talking about earlier, what you were doing up in Vermont, looking at the astronomical orientation of some of these structures,
Yes.
and why that might have been so important
Right.
to ancient peoples. So yeah, there's no shortage of topics.
All fruitful avenues. Yeah.
That's right. So people can support patreon.com/Randall Carlson. Is that right, Brad?
That's the one.
Okay.
Yeah, and I will be getting out some of the audio versions of the shows.
That's right.
Onto the RSS feed.
Yeah, the feed is up and running. We just have to.
The reason why there's only one show is my fault. So I'm gonna get that done.
Yeah.
Taking the blame.
Hopefully by the time they hear this, there'll be more.
It'll already be done.
That's right.
Exactly. And there's not another
for that.
There's not another part of the address that goes in. It's just Kosmographia.com, correct?
That's right.
Yep.
And so to look up the RSS feed, people can search anywhere podcasts are found, Google Play, iTunes, whatever. Just look up Kosmographia and it'll come up.
Beautiful.
So, all right. I think that's a wrap.
We were just
Excellent
scratching
again.
the surface on Atlantis, but we're going to have to move on, folks.
That's right. All right. Good night, folks. Thanks
Loved
very
it.
much.
Yep.
This is Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast.